Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to check out very important things that you might have missed because these are on the margins, but people who spent their whole life working on something, or a big chunk of their life, never got paid, never got recognized, but put out in general great theories, especially theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, cosmologies, also tour de forces and magnum opuses, earth-shattering discoveries from both ancient and modern sources. And we've looked a lot at the ancient Egyptian tree of life and the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. Today is our 263rd video that we've done on what is called the Reciprocal Church, which is in honor of Dewey B. Larson. Mr. Larson's reciprocal system was a theory of everything that basically united all of the major fields of science, and then also united science with religion. What religion? Well, that's kind of what we're looking at in the Reciprocal Church. We're looking at different sources of people who put together some kind of study that has a spiritual component, numinous, and something that you can use in your own life to help you put together a spiritual practice with a syncretic mindset of, use it if it resonates with you, discard it if it doesn't. Use many and diverse sources of things that you can put together for yourself into an individual practice. I think that right now we've got in the West, we've got 3 major religions. I'll say 5 major religions. What we need to have is like 5 billion religions. Everybody's got their own because that's where it comes from. It comes from inside. And so we're trying to give you the tools that you need to be able to put something together, because those 5 major religions that we're talking about are on the brink of collapse. One might say they've already collapsed, but we just haven't figured it out. They've been thrown off a cliff and they just haven't landed yet. And in particular, I'm talking about Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Satanism, and atheism, otherwise known as scientism. And all of these things have been shown to be false, or at best a limited hangout. And actually we are looking at the best of those 5 religions. I would say Christianity is the best. And what we see, though, when we look at the New Testament is we see basically a limited hangout. Just like a limited hangout in the conspiratorial conspiracy theory world. A limited hangout is when you have like a spy or an agent or a misinformer who 80 or 90% of what they say is true and is valid and is useful, but then they really get you with that other 10% and they get you completely off track. That was the whole purpose. So Christianity is like that. Yes, Christianity has been able to build many social structures that are valuable and contribute to a society that is probably, more free than these other ones. But ultimately, it is not true. And so what do we do with that? Well, so in this video, we're looking at the work of Michael Menascotz, Menasgotz, who has a new book out called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. The Flavians were the dynasty of Roman emperors from 69 to 96 AD that included Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian. And the theory is that the Roman emperors wrote the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament. And they did so as a form of psychological warfare against the Jews, who they had just gotten done fighting in a war called the War of the Jews, 66 to 73 AD. They wrote a story about Jesus and backdated him by 40 years. And then they wrote this other book called War of the Jews, which was a history, which parallels or kind of has a conversation or works in unison with the Gospels. So this War of the Jews book was written by a person named Josephus, who was, even according to his own autobiography, was a member of the Roman royal family, an adopted member of the royal family, and one of the court historians for Emperors Vespasian and Titus. And I have to suggest, like some other scholars, that Josephus never existed, and he was just one of the Romans, although he claims to have been a Jew. And if you look at his story, it's a very tall tale. And so his history of the War of the Jews is also extremely suspect. But when you recognize that the War of the Jews and the Gospels go together, then you can kind of piece it together, and you can kind of understand the codes that are going on. It's not a matter of the War of the Jews became later and parodied or mocked or paralleled the Gospels, because it works both ways. In many cases, the Gospels are parodying or paralleling Wars of the Jews by Josephus. So you can't really say that one was written before the other. They must have been written at the same time by the same people for the same reason. And the reason is because they were so tired of fighting wars against the Jews, which had been going on for over 100 years, that they decided to use a psychological operation and propose a Jewish hero and even a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace, who believed in turning the other cheek, in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, in walking an extra mile with the Romans' pack on his back, in praising the Roman slave owner for having the greatest faith in all of Judea, and many other things, and also getting rid of many of the Jewish rules and strictures, the Levitical code or Deuteronomical code that the Jews had that made them so separatist. This, the 10 Commandments even. Jesus only really advocates 5 of the 10 Commandments. And Jesus wants us to get rid, and especially Paul, wants us to get rid of the, stricture against graven images, the kosher food laws, the circumcision laws, and even changing the day of the Sabbath. We're doing all of that through the instrumentation of the Romans, who wanted to do this in order to mellow out the Jews. This was really only targeted toward one sect of Jews. The Romans did the exact same thing for the kind of Pharisaic, as opposed to the more zealous aspect of the Jews. They proposed what you call rabbinical Judaism, and the story is exactly the same. Instead of Josephus, it was a guy named Yohanan ben Zakkai, and his interaction with the Roman emperor was almost identical, and he was rewarded by getting a land grant where they could build kind of a monastery, so-called a college, for the Jews to study the scriptures. And that's what gave birth to the rabbinical Judaist school, which was kind of an offshoot of the Pharisees. So the Romans had the method. They also created a number of religions where the Caesars were worshipped. Augustus Caesar, Julius Caesar, Claudius Caesar, and then Vespasian and Titus Caesar as well. They all had cults or religions that were followed them, and they were all so-called deified by the Roman Senate, which was an actual procedure that they followed. So the Romans were not new to creating religion. So this is not like something that's out there. In fact, this theory is so obvious once it's pointed out to you. The Romans are the only people that could have possibly written the Gospels. Nobody had any ability to write anything in the first century. The Romans had the whole thing locked down. They had a monopoly on writing. They had a monopoly on reading, just about, especially Greek, and then which is what the language of the Gospels was. And then they had a monopoly on publishing. Nobody's publishing anything in Rome at this time, especially in large quantities. And then they also had a monopoly on disseminating the literature. There is no way that a small sect of semi-literate Jews are going to be able to put out the Gospels in the quantities that they were put out in. And so, of course, this also means that the stories about all the persecution of Christians didn't happen. The Romans supported Christianity, even if they pretended that they didn't. All of the persecutions, the lions and the gladiators, those were Jews, not Christians. And of course, at that time, the line was kind of perforated, or there wasn't a clear line between Christians and Jews. For example, James, the brother of Jesus, so-called, he was a Jew, but then he gradually became someone who believed in Jesus. So he, eventually, or Paul, there's a conversion point at a certain point. And the historians that talk about all the persecutions that Christians suffered aren't really paying very close attention to that line between Christians and Jews. So anyway, what Michael Menescott does in this book is he takes the book of Luke, the third gospel, and he puts it on the vertical axis, all 24 chapters, 1 through 24, 1 at the bottom, 24 at the top. This is on his graph paper or his chart or whatever. And then he takes War of the Jews by Josephus and puts it on the horizontal axis, all 694 paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way across. And whenever he finds a parallel, after digging through these two texts. Now, Josephus is much longer than the book of Luke. But digging through these two texts for 4 years, he managed to uncover 250 parallels, which, is pretty overwhelming to start with. And then when he mapped them out or graphed them out on the chart, they make 5 Latin letters, APTVS. They should just make a random pattern, except for the fact that the Romans signed their names to the book of Luke. This was the signature, APTVS, which I believe stands for Arius Piso Titus Vespasianus, but it might stand for something else. I definitely suggest that the T and the V stand for Titus and Vespasian. And I do believe that the Romans had minted some coins right around 80 AD that have an inscription that says TVS. The AP, Menescats and I differ about what that is, but again, I think that's kind of not a really big deal. It's just a detail. The main point is that the Romans wrote the Gospels, and they made so many parallels between their book, War of the Jews, and the Gospels that it's overwhelming evidence that they were both written by the same people, meaning that the Gospels were also written by the Romans, because we know that Josephus was written by the Romans, and that when you look at it closely, they actually put their own signatures on it. They signed their names to it. So what Menescats does is he goes through the parallels like one at a time and lets you see for yourself how strong the parallels are. Are they coincidences, or are they obvious, or and so some are a little bit of one, a little bit of the other. When you have 250, they're not all going to be obvious, or else the whole game would be up immediately. They have to kind of hide them because they don't want to be discovered, at least in their own lifetime. They knew that they were going to be discovered eventually. They probably didn't think it was going to take 1950 years to be discovered. And it didn't. Many authors throughout, at least, from the Middle Age, from the early modern period until now, have figured it out, including the author who wrote as William Shakespeare. All of the plays of William Shakespeare are about this exact topic, that the Romans wrote the Gospels, including probably his it was actually a her, most famous play, Romeo and Juliet. So read that. But what you can do right now is you can download a copy of Josephus's Wars of the Jews, and you can go over it with the Gospels yourself. You don't have to believe me, just read it in front of your face. Now, if you want to say that, Josephus was mistranslated or something like that, well, that's possible. I can't, I'm just looking at, I don't read Greek, so I'm just looking at what's in front of me in English. And so there is a room for another conspiracy there, or whatever, another error. I'm guessing that that's not what's happening, but I'm willing to accept that okay, they mistranslated Josephus to make it look like there was all this code. That's possible, but I think it's doubtful. And so let's start here. He's going through another parallel. He was talking about Lazarus, the father of John the Baptist, and how he is employed in this code. There are many different themes of the codes. One of the main theme is, not the main theme, but a major theme is that what Jesus predicts in the Gospels is fulfilled by Titus in Wars of the Jews. Titus and Vespasian were both generals in the war. And so when they're talking about the war, they're often talking about Vespasian and Titus, especially Titus. And so what Jesus predicts in a symbolic or parable is literally fulfilled by Titus. Titus is literally the second coming of Jesus. And the people that are waiting for the second coming of Jesus missed it by over 1900 years. And not only are those prophecies fulfilled, but the location where Jesus makes the prophecies is the exact location where Titus fulfills the prophecies. And the date that Jesus makes the predictions is exactly 40 years before when Titus fulfills them. Okay, so let's talk about Lazarus here and see where he goes from here. The next parallel involves sections of Luke, which indicate that Zacharias, I think I said Lazarus. Lazarus and Zacharias are like the same because they're both A to Z. But he's talking in particular about Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist. And also a cousin of either Joseph or Mary. The next parallel involves sections of Luke which indicate that Zacharias is the cousin-in-law of the Virgin Mary, and that the timing of her pregnancy is linked to her arrival at his house. What he's hinting at is that Mary is not a virgin. She was impregnated by Zacharias, and this becomes clear in these lines from Luke and from Josephus. And this is, they do this, so the Virgin Mary, the virgin birth is kind of like one of the most outlandish things that's in the New Testament, along with the resurrection itself. I did a video almost 2 years ago about the resurrection, and that's also in Code. You have to read all 4 of the Gospels at once, all 4 of their accounts of the resurrection at once to understand what's going on. But it's a mockery, just like all of this is just a mockery. You have to start with John, and basically all of the angels that are in the cave, in the tomb, and the empty tomb, and all of it is basically, if you read it correctly, it shows you that Jesus was not resurrected. They were at Lazarus's tomb, and that each one of the disciples convinced each other that what they were seeing, it was basically a comedy of errors, where they see somebody inside the tomb, or one or two people outside the tomb, and they assume that they're angels. And it's more or less like a Three's Company episode, if you remember that TV show from the 80s, where everything is based on mistaken identity. That's what the resurrection is all about, if you read that in Code. Now he's getting to the virgin birth, and they also are mocking you for believing in that. So it starts with paragraph 154 and 156 from Jewish War. That's book 1, chapter 22, verse 5, and then 2 after that. When Herod was about to take a journey abroad, he put his wife Miriam, or Mary, in the care of Joseph. But Joseph told Herod how she procured a love potion for him. So Herod concluded that Joseph must have debauched Miriam. It's spelled Mariammne. And that there were 2 Miriams. And I believe Herod was married to both of them. Not totally sure about that, but either way, it goes on. So Herod killed them both. Yeah, because Herod killed one of them, and then he married another one. So Herod killed them both, only to have visions of her, only to then have visions of her and speak to her as if alive. And this happened at Sebaste, Sebaste, in Samaria. So basically, the adultery was alleged to have occurred in the mountains of Samaria. Now we go to Luke chapter 1, and this starts at verse 22. It's also included 27, 28, 39. As Zacharias came out of the temple, it seemed he had seen a vision. And then it goes on, and a virgin called Mary was espoused to a man called Joseph of the house of David. The angel told her, "The Lord is with you, Okay, I'm just kind of looking at okay. Um, the Lord is with you. You are blessed. Then it goes on, and Mary went into the hill country, the mountains, and went to the house of Zacharias, the husband of her cousin Elizabeth. And then he brings in something from Matthew. Matthew chapter 1, verse 19, which he does a lot. It's in order to break some of these codes, you have to bring in extraneous information, often from Matthew or Mark or John or Revelation, or sometimes from Josephus's other books. He has another book, an autobiography. He has another 20-volume work called Antiquities of the Jews. And he has another one that's called Against Appian. So sometimes they bring in this extraneous information that you also have to know to be able to break these codes. But the thing is that this is what the Romans did as a major pastime, is played around with puns and codes and ciphers and riddles and literary riddles. And so the Romans would have been able to decode this. The Roman royals, who were the only ones who were really able to read in the first place. Okay, so this, so finally we go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 19. Joseph knew the baby wasn't his, therefore he considered that Mary committed adultery. That's all in parentheses. That certainly isn't what Matthew 1:19 says. So I don't even know why he lists that, because it's not presenting any text from Matthew. I'd like to actually see what that actually says. Matthew 1 verse 19. I'll try to check that out, because that seems very evasive that he's doing that. Just he cites the verse, but he doesn't say anything about. He says something about the verse, but he doesn't cite the verse. Let's hear his analysis. Here, a Jewish war uses Herod and his espoused adulterer Mary, with Joseph up in the hills, to mirror Joseph and his espoused adulterer, the Virgin Mary, similarly up in the hills. As with most parallels in the first half of Jewish war, this is just a parallel which exists to put a dot or star on the chart. He said earlier that he suggests that the AP of the APTVS pattern was inserted later, and because he feels like a lot of those parallels are much weaker than the ones later on in the TVS pattern. So that probably Titus or Vespasian put together the TVS pattern, and then somebody later, possibly Domitian or possibly Arius Piso, put in the AP part in a later period, because the parallels are much weaker, and also because War of the Jews occurred between 66 and 73 AD, but the book 1 starts in like 150 BC, and we don't get up to 66 AD until we get up to the TVS part. Okay, so this is just a parallel which exists to put a dot or star on the chart and does not offer a meaningful hidden message. However, it does hint at the idea that Mary was debauched up in the hills at Zacharias' house. Again, I'll come back to this amazing hidden message shortly. Yeah, so that's interesting, but I really wish he would have actually used the text of Matthew 1:19 so that we would know what's actually going on. And I will maybe try to find that, or if somebody wants to put it in the comments, so that we understand where he's coming from. Perhaps he will also mention it when he gets there, when he goes in depth on that parallel. But for now, he's, I think, going into a different parallel. And this is starting at Jewish War 602 and 3, Book 6, Chapter 1, paragraph 6 and 7. Sabinus went with 11 others, so a total of 12, with a divine fury, but he stumbled on a certain large stone and fell down upon it headlong. And 2 days later, on the third day, 12 of those men on the forefront called for a trumpeter, and killed at the 9th hour of the night. They cut the throats of the guards who were asleep, and because of the noise, all the Jews fell into a mine underground. And the fight began, the killing of Jews at the 9th hour of night. And then we go to Luke chapter 24, final chapter, and verse 2. Jesus, who went around with what are termed the 12, was in a tomb, or was put underground, and the women and others went and found the stone rolled away. Matthew 26 and 27 confirms that Jesus was betrayed as they slept, and also that it was a big stone, and more generally indicates that Jesus was divine and that this happened on the third day. And then he goes back to Luke 23, verses 33 and 46. And Jesus died at the 9th hour and was put underground, and the sun darkened, to which Matthew adds the sound of a trumpet was heard. Okay, so he says the parallel above again lacks any hidden message, but the level of detail is noteworthy to the point it would not occur by chance. I suppose I can agree. There's a stone, there's a falling down, there's a 12, there's a third day, there's a trumpeter, if you include Matthew. There was a killing that went on at the 9th hour, and they fell into an underground mine. And so all of those things are in both of those parallels, even though they're both quite short. So I think we'll stop there. We'll take over here tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a